Hey babes, welcome back. Music Corner, as always, host Boba Tea. That's right, this video is brought to you by the big boba industry. Today, as we have made a habit of doing over the past couple of years, it is time for a 10-year retrospective, looking back 10 years today on the best albums of 2012. Yes, the year that the world famously ended, the end times, the finale of all things. It was great. I don't know if you guys remember it as fondly as I do, as a middle schooler, I suppose. But generally speaking, this year is pretty good for music. I had a little bit of trouble putting this list together, not the hardest that I've ever done, but the high end, the top 10 to 15 albums on this list are amazing. And as badly as I want to fly right to that point, I am obviously doing my due diligence here. This is the top 50 albums, not 15, 50. And it came from a short list of 140 records. I have been working on this for quite a while, so I feel pretty good about the list. With that being said, I did have to make some difficult cuts towards the end of this list. There are albums like the Holograms and Flying Lotus records that didn't end up included that I kind of wanted to, and I do just want to put out there that I cut both the Crystal Castles album 3 and the Sun Kill Moon record Among the Leaves. Now, the Sun Kill Moon album almost certainly would have made this list, but I will have no choice but to talk about Mark Kozelek and his music in future episodes of this series. I'm just kind of delaying it for now because I don't really want to, and it was close anyway. So it got the opportunity for me to include 50 great albums that I can wholeheartedly and genuinely recommend to you without anyone coming after my moral compass yet. We'll get there next year. Link in for clips cut around this big and probably quite long video into little pieces, little digestible pieces. Please don't watch it all at once. You'll go as crazy as I do making it all at once. Let's not waste another single second and go ahead and get into the list with number 50, Converge. Interpolate hardcore music into their typical metalcore and mathcore sound with one of the better records late in their career. I think they are still to this day on a really, really creative run that was kicked off by this album, and it still sounds really enjoyable to listen to in retrospect. And while 10 years later, the sound of indie music has changed from the breezy indie pop, that washed out reverb heavy sound that was the style in 2012, I still have to say that I enjoy this Wild Nothing album quite a bit. I think it does the sounds of this genre justice given how oversaturated they were. I also gotta hand it to Recondite, German acid house producer, for his album On Acid, which fittingly explores acid house in a way that I think has aged really, really well in terms of the minimalist electronica of today. And at number 47, the Ty Segall Band album Slaughterhouse. If you know Ty Segall, you know exactly what makes this kind of stuff good. It rips. At number 46, we have the debut album from Jessie Ware, Devotion. Quite a good start, although it did strap her down with this mature pop star image that kind of, I don't want to say haunted, but hung over her career for quite a while until she just recently overcame it with her best record yet. But still, looking back on Devotion, I was impressed by how much I enjoyed all of the great melodies, all of the wonderful, rich instrumentals. I think this holds up really well as a contemporary pop record. 45, I Will Be My Own Hell Because There Is a Devil Inside My Body. A great album title from Teen Suicide. Sam Ray with this really, really lo-fi, artsy, indie, singer-songwritery project is really, really interesting, and I think it's aged really well given how much the lo-fi recording aesthetic has seeped its way into pretty much every single genre these days. At number 44, White Suns with Sinews. There is a great record like this pretty much every year, just a really challenging, really noisy, abrasive, intense, abstract rock record. This thing is difficult as shit, but I really enjoy it. And at number 43, you cannot tell the story of 2012 without one of its weirdest breakout acts, Chromatics with Kill for Love. And even if this music sounds 10 years later like it's confusing as to why the critics were so enamored with this thing, as somebody who read the early buzz on this record, it made sense at the time, and listening to it 10 years later, I have this feverish fondness inside me for the band's synth rocky excess. 42, Bat for Lashes, The Haunted Man, right in the middle of a really interesting, really good streak of records for Bat for Lashes is this thing, a really enjoyable, mature, poppy singer-songwriter kind of album. And at number 41, the long, indulgent, but still kind of enjoyable Swans album, The Seer. Now, this is not necessarily the Swans album to a lot of people, but at least in this new rendition of the band that is drowning in this repetition, this extravagance of instrumentation in a very dark sense, this is probably my favorite album they've done since reforming. At number 40, I don't think people are going to like this, particularly not the indie heads or fellow critics, but Passion Pit with Gossamer. I had not heard this record in years, probably since the last Passion Pit album came out in 2017, but revisiting it for this list, it just hits. These songs just hit. They are so infectious, so instantaneous, so enjoyable. I still love this record. And at number 39, Jack White with Blunderbuss, an album that I think a lot more people liked at the time than like now, compared to some of the stuff he would go on to do with his solo career. It is not quite as bold, it is not quite as brash, but his structure and his style of songwriting and sonic experimentation and wandering is still really, really present on this record, and I still really enjoy it. 38, Fiona Apple with The Idler Wheel has forgotten to memorize the rest of the album title. Yeah, I know this thing is a big fan favorite, a record that a lot of people love, and this thing's best tracks are some of the best of Fiona Apple's entire career. And while it's not as consistent as I would like, or as my favorite Fiona Apple records are, I still think it deserves a spot on this list for all of the really interesting things that it does right and the big step forward it took in Fiona Apple's career arc. At number 37, the self-titled debut album from Melody's Echo Chamber. Just a flat-out, vivid, fun, psychedelic pop and rock outfit, and not the last one of that nature that we'll be talking about today. 36, Billy Woods with History Will Absolve Me. This was certainly not a record I think I heard at the time, or really even had the musical backing to process and to fully grasp at the time, but after having a long time to sit with this thing, I am just amazed by how intense it is in every element of it, from the instrumentation to Billy Wood's unmistakable vocals to the song topics and themes. This is just an intense listen. And intense in its own right. At number 35, Pallbearer with Sorrow and Extinction, a stoner metal-y, doom metal-y album that I've come to really enjoy, and I think a lot of people who enjoy alternative metal hold up as this really interesting moment in the development of those genres, though I am surprised that this thing does not have more fans in 2022 than it does. 34, On to Tropica. I really don't know what's worse, trying and failing to pronounce this correctly, or not really trying at all. I'm just not going to say it again, but this is the name of the group, and then this is what their album's called. It's the same thing. They are a collective of Latin musicians from all over the place who penned this massive revitalization and experimental collection of Latin music styles and tunes that are just taken to some really fun, really interesting directions. I highly recommend this thing even if you don't really have the experience in Latin music. You may think you need to understand it. And at 33, another album I'll recommend to just about anyone, the Father John Misty record, Fear Fun. This thing is just witty, it is creative, it is easy to listen to. These songs are just enjoyably charming and a little bit arrogant, but still really funny, and Father John Misty's sense of humor has not waned on me since I first heard this album forever ago. At number 32, Purity Ring, with their kind of breakout album, Shrines. Yeah, a lot of people absolutely adore this thing, like Danny Brown in particular absolutely adores this thing. I think it's good. I think it has some really great high points. It's not like this huge standout moment in pop music and alternative pop music for me, but it's definitely worth a listen, and I definitely like it. Next up, one of the most fun noise rocky albums you'll ever hear at number 31, Dope Body with Natural History. This is another band that I feel like people have kind of forgotten about, kind of left behind in 2012, but I remember this thing getting a lot of critical acclaim, and for good reason. It holds up so well. It is so thrilling to listen to, even all this time later. Number 30, I'm saying it, I do not care. I will fall on this sword. I will die on this hill. I don't care that Nate Ruess basically now just tweets professionally, nor do I care that he who shall not be named has ruined the entire pop music industry. Kind of. It's Jack Antonoff. Fun, some nights, but listen, Jack Antonoff didn't even produce this music, Jeff Bhasker did. And you know what? It hits. It's good. I like Fun. I like this band. Nate is such a unique vocalist and songwriter, and this album is still a really interesting, creative, outside-the-box pop record to listen to. All of these years later, I don't give a shit what people think about this band or its individual members in the 10 years since. All I know is that I continue to enjoy listening to Some Nights. As far as an album I know that I won't have to defend is Krallice with Years Past Matter at number 29, a technical metal experience, an ambitious scope for a metal project like this, but one that I just find riveting, consistently darkly enjoyable, and even as Krallice continue to release new material and take it in new directions, returning to Years Past Matter is never not satisfying. At number 28, one of my favorite records at the time, Dirty Projectors with Swing Low Magellan. Not as crazy about this album as I used to be. I know now through the lens of reflection and context that this was a turn in a much more accessible direction for the band, which connected with me more at the time than it did now. But even going back to this record, there are tons of highlights, all of the great David Longstrethian songwriting that you would expect from even their most brash and experimental records shows up in different ways on this project. I think Dirty Projectors fans can still find a lot to appreciate about it. 27, Hot Chip with In Our Heads. I wrestled with making this whole segment about like a girls eat McDonald's hot chip and lie thing. I was really going to go all out for it too, but I decided I should actually talk a little bit about the band and the music. And in that way, this is just a great, fun, groovy dance record that I highly recommend if you're looking for some good-ass vibes. 26, the permanently underrated Suzanne Sunfor with the Silicone Veil, who continued in her career mirroring the worlds of classical music instrumentation and chamber and Baroque instrumentation with electronica, genuine electronica and indie-tronica, and creating these fascinating fusions that are just whimsical and amazing and still really click with me. Halfway through the list, 25 ticks in the old book, and if I can see the other side of the room, it looks like Indiana is about to advance to the March Madness Championship instead of Wyoming. But this is not a sports channel, this is a music channel, and that means that we are talking about 25 spiritualized with one of their most intimate and beautiful and spacey albums, but also one that is not afraid to dial it up and jam a little bit. It is still so refreshing to see Spiritualized so late into their career, as recently as just earlier this year, dropping great, amazing stuff like this. Sweetheart, Sweet Light is the name of that record. BT dubs. At number 24, Perfume Genius with Put Your Back Into It, the upward arc of Mike Hadrius' career as Perfume Genius is something that we will continue to revisit over and over again as we dive into more of these lists from the 2010s, but at this point we are still dealing with these very stark piano ballads where we are seeing how great of a storyteller and an emotional provocateur Mike is. This scant record still provides so much in the way of compelling emotion that I think it would be impossible for this to ever go out of style. 23, Marina and the Diamonds, Electra Heart, now just Marina, I suppose. Well, this is not quite the cult pop album of her debut. If anything, it served as a breakout, a launching pad into the black and white, just girly things Tumblr era of Marina's career, which I embarrassingly thoroughly took part in and have a lot of fond memories from this record. And listening to it in retrospect, maybe it's not the masterpiece that I likely once told all my friends at the lunch table it was, but this record still hits. The hooks are great, the beats are great, it is frontal, it is forward, it is no frills, and I enjoy it quite a bit. In stark contrast, 22, Julia Holter, Ecstasis, a really, really interesting indulgence from Julia, a step in the right direction, another career we will be talking about over and over and over again, who released just so much great material in the 2010s, and this is only the first of so many great, meandering, dark chamber albums that she would go on to release. Just outside the top 20 at number 21, the Grammy Award-winning Channel Orange, Frank Ocean. A lot of people love this record and believe that it's one of like the great R&B albums of all time, and you know, maybe it's not that good, and once we saw what Frank Ocean's potential truly was, it's hard to look back and lump that kind of praise onto Channel Orange, but it is a pretty good record. Pyramids continues to be one of the most ambitious songs Frank Ocean has ever made. Super Rich Kids is a massive personal favorite, with one of my favorite featured verses of the whole decade, courtesy of Earl Sweatshirt, and Thinking About You is like one of his most well-known and beloved songs ever. Kicking off the top 20, Absolve, Control System. What a weird, strange hip-hop experience. Like, when Top Dog was at their peak, they just had this ability, this knack for finding really unique talent, and Absolve, purely in terms of uniqueness, might be the best example of that in the label's history. This album just kicks so much ass when it wants to. Absolve is confident, his deliveries are impassioned and unique, his vocals are unmistakable. I just think this is a really, really interesting hip-hop record that probably doesn't get as much credit as it deserves. Number 19, Panopticon with Kentucky, sort of a breakout record for the Appalachian folk meets black metal combination, and while this may be the earliest rendition of that sound that doesn't quite explore it to the same level as future Panopticon records, this is still a really, really riveting and enjoyable listen. The way that these songs and these passages spring off of each other into these intense and emotional moments, these crazy wandering spells of sound, it is still a dark and mystifying listen. At number 18, another album that I was obsessed with closer to the time that it came out, and I still cannot deny how good it is. Joey Badass with 1999. Man, I love this record, and it makes me so nostalgic for those pro-era days. Like, wow, the level of creativity that Joey was on at such a young age, the beats he was gathering to rap over, like the taste-making ability of this record, and the amount of just amazing contributors and collaborators Joey was able to find, plus his own natural talent to infuse into this record. It is just one of the beacons of light of the mixtape era of the early 2010s that I think holds up extremely well. And probably my favorite of the washed out and reverbed era of indie sound, DIIV with Oshin comes in at number 17. This is a great record that fuses a heavy style of dream pop with this emotional, almost shoegazy layering style, but it never really gets so heavy that it transcends indie pop and indie rock. It walks a really, really fine line, but clearly does so carefully and methodically in a way that I just find so infectious and so enjoyable. Number 16, listen up. If you know your shit, if you're in the know, if you know you know, then you knew that we were going to have to talk about this record. And people probably don't want to, because there was a point in time where this album that I am about to tell you is the 16th best of 2012 was thought of as one of the worst albums ever made by anyone. But through this weird guise of hyper pop and the rise of experimental electronic music into the culture of music circles and young people and queer people, it has become a weird late stage fan favorite accidental experimental electropop sensation. And of course I'm talking about Farrah Abraham with My Teenage Dream Ended. This album is fucking insane. There's absolutely no way around it. The only thing I can even think to compare this to is Death Grip's Ex-Military from the list last year, where I just didn't know how to put into words how unfiltered and unhinged the music is here. Like, this legitimately sounds like Farrah Abraham was trying to make such a brash, experimental, and uncompromising vision, and yet I think what makes this thing so appealing, so unique, so experimental even 10 years later was like a total accident. If you've never heard this record, give it a shot, and unless you have experience with some really out there electronic and pop music, you're probably not gonna like it at first, but I have a feeling that some of it might stick with you. At number 15, another band that I remember people, maybe just younger people that were closer to my age at the time, not really clicking with at first, and that is Alt J with their debut album. Yes, an awesome wave over here. Now, 10 years later, Breeze Blocks is thoroughly etched into the culture of indie music, but that wasn't always the case, and I think it was these guys' weird, watery, reverbed, oddball sound and the strange vocals that turned a lot of people off, but they slowly became kind of a sensation to the point where I was really surprised to see how many people came out in support of their album released earlier this year. And because their albums have pretty much gotten collectively worse and worse with each new release, I think that is a real testament to how much goodwill they have built up from this really, really enjoyable debut album. At number 14, another breakout album, Mac DeMarco 2. Yes, if you know Mac DeMarco, you're pretty familiar with the formula. You know what makes his dreamy, lackadaisical, indie stoner songs click. It's all present here. Some of his best tunes show up on this record, and while I wouldn't call it conceptual, it is sonically connected in a way that makes it a very satisfying listen. And at number 13, the album that is kind of like Run the Jewels 0.5, Killer Mike's rap music, which is entirely produced by LP, though he doesn't rap on it much, but this is the launch pad that one of the most ubiquitous rap duos of the rest of the decade after this would use to launch their best music. And while this is stylistically different from a lot of what Run the Jewels would go on to do. There are still so many highlights here. There are songs that purely and intently insist on being fucking hard-hitting southern rap bangers, and there are other tracks that take a much smarter, much more conceptual and political stance. Both elements are done so extremely effectively. Number 12, an album that grows on me every single time I hear it. Bad Bad Not Good with BB&G 2, yet another collection of amazing jazz covers from the worlds of My Bloody Valentine to the Odd Future selection to even James Blake shows up on this thing, not to mention the very notorious Kanye West Flashing Lights cover. This is just a group of young jazz musicians operating extremely highly and applying their unique sonic direction to some of the tracks that inspired them, and the results are spectacular. Shout out to product placement. Number 11, The Tallest Man on Earth, with another helping of amazing, indulgent, bright, and intoxicating folk tunes. Just a really, really smart and enjoyable collection of tracks. Overall, everything good that you can say about any Tallest Man on Earth record, you can say about this one. It's amazing for all the same reasons. Inside the top 10, number 10, if you can believe it, Chelsea Manning's New Girlfriend with Visions. That's Grimes, actually, and I'm really hoping that the wheel of celebrity pop culture does not turn so fast these days that that joke is already dated by the time I even drop this video. But in case you need a timestamp, that's where we're at in the world. And yes, you may remember Grimes squandering all of the goodwill she built up on earlier albums. This is earlier albums. This is amazing. This is a wonderful little tight, synthetic, extremely imaginative, but very contained vision from Grimes. These songs really, really zero it in with their scope and the instrumentation, the light, the breezy vocals that Grimes works into all of these songs go together to make utterly infectious music throughout. Like, I just felt like at the time that this was really a code that in Grimes's mind that was going to be able to last for forever, and for so long it did. And then it did. Pivoting to two people whose brains still work just as well as they always have. At number 9, Beach House with Bloom. What can I say about this record that hasn't been said so many times before about so many great Beach House records? Beautiful, wonderfully composed, immaculate, dark dream pop songs. There's vivid imagery, vivid songwriting, illustrious instrumentation to be found all over this record, and while it's not my favorite that they have ever released, the fact that it's one of my 10 favorite records of the year just shows you how indomitable their discography is. Like, I can't say enough good stuff about Beach House and about this record. Number 8, Japandroids, Celebration Rock. And yes, this band is still landing at this spot on the list, even though they canceled their Shaky Knees show where they were going to play this album in its entirety, and I was going to get to see it and sing it, and it was going to be great. I'm not mad. I'm a little mad, but I'm not really mad, because this album fucking rules. Like, the life-affirming indie rock and punk rock that Japandroids channel on this album is absolutely righteous and awesome, and it's kind of like the Black Keys albums that were being made around this era, in the way that I can't even envision a world where rock music that is this catchy, this righteous can ever go out of style. I will never not be happy listening to Celebration Rock. I'm trying not to make this like an hour long, but it's getting harder and harder because I want to talk about records like number 7, Flume, self-titled. I don't even know where to start. There's probably a lot of people who think that Flume hadn't even been around this long because the first thing that they heard of him was probably that Never Be Like You song that became a really random hit when you think about it. But honestly, in people who roll in EDM circles while also dipping their toes in the world of critically acclaimed and alternative music, it was really clear that Flume was something special. He was ahead of his contemporaries, and this album holds up so well in that sense. It is clear that while Flume is still working within the guise of EDM, he has ambitions well beyond the genre's boring-ass festival-grade hopes, and this thing is still a monolith, still a testament to his ambition and to his vision within a genre that he would go on to transcend completely on later releases. I am similarly enamored with, well, I guess all of the records we have left to talk about, but among them is number 6, Cloud Nothings with Attack on Memory. This is definitely an album I was wrong about at first. I don't know if I heard it right when it came out, but certainly by the time the follow-up came out, I was very familiar with both records, and I said for a while that I really thought their next record was better, and it took some more gathering of musical context before I realized just what makes Attack on Memory so good, what makes the way that the band interprets and advances and revises the aesthetics of punk rock, lo-fi rock, noise rock, and pushes them into a direction that's not necessarily more loud or more extreme, but somehow more intense and more emotional and more personal. I continue to just relate so directly to this album, to the music, and to its sentiments. It speaks to me in a way that so few genres with this much polarizing distortion and noise and sound really ever can, and I find that fascinating. Number 5, Godspeed You Black Emperor, Alleluia, Don't Bend, Ascend. Yes, after a long time where this band wasn't, I suppose, what you would call active, they returned to touring, and out of nowhere, suddenly, there was a new Godspeed You Black Emperor album, and one that changed up their compositional style, the way they lay their albums out, and formulated a template that they're still kind of following to this day. This album is absolutely goddamn brilliant. It has everything that people praise Godspeed You Black Emperor for, the vivid and imaginative way that they can turn post-rock into apocalyptic and emotional stories, and this wonderful world that it's so easy to become encapsulated by and deeply involved in. I just can't tell you how this record is able to say as much as it does without actually saying anything. It is a testament to just how much of a musical virtuoso so many of the people involved in it are. It boggles the mind how this album is able to be so good. Maybe I need to have like a PhD in music theory to understand how these chords and these progressions and these compositions can say things, but as for right now, with the current knowledge in my little head, it blows me away. Number 4, Death Grips, The Money Store. By all consensus, one of the most acclaimed albums of 2012, and one of the most influential albums of 2012, because there is an absolute avalanche, a tsunami of experimental hip-hop that either becomes popular in the wake of this album, or is inspired by and directly influenced by the music on this album and Death Grip's first album and all the albums they would go on to make. Whereas Ex-Military is an absolutely batshit insane tornado of sound, I would say that The Money Store is more composed, more musical, and more catchy. It is insane how catchy these songs are. Given the cacophony of instrumentation, the extremely technical performances, and Stefan MC Ride's screaming guttural vocals. This thing has one memorable hook after another. The refrains here are awesome. The lyrics are just as insane and indulgent and compelling as you'd expect them to be. Everything about this record is all of the different styles of Death Grips come together and operating at their most perfect, at peak performance. And it is just a wild ride, but one that I am thrilled to hop on board with over and over again. At number 3, Tame Impala, Lonerism. I have long been a massive fan of this record, a big supporter of this band, even though many of the fans that Lonerism made have since turned their back on Tame Impala, who have become an extremely popular, even meme-worthy band in the decades since this album came out. You may have seen this one where some guy at like a party or something insists on telling you that Tame Impala, it's actually only one guy. And yes, the main brain of Tame Impala, Kevin Parker, responsible for so much of the amazing material on Lonerism, the psychedelic rock and pop vision, the vivid, explosive instrumental compositions, the amazing way that these songs fit together into neat, infectious, and impactful runs within the album proper. I just enjoy everything that it has to offer. It is hooky, yet it can be indulgent. It is immediate but gratifying in the long term. It is amazing that an album can sound like this, be like this, both as instantaneously satisfying and deeply infectious, detailed, and involved. It's a testament to Kevin Parker as both a pop musician capable of penning these songs that get stuck in your head, and an experimental musician crafting ideas that sound so unique together you can't stop thinking about them. It all comes together remarkably on Lonerism. I love, love, love this record. Number 2, and I mean it, so don't hate me or get mad at me, Kendrick Lamar, Good Kid, Mad City. Yes, much like when I doubled up on the Kanye being a runner-up in 2010, I know exactly what I'm doing, getting into the beef of hip-hop Twitter and Instagram, and if you're a hip-hop meme page admin, I know that this is your favorite album of the year, unless for some reason you've gravitated towards something else, probably Frank Ocean. But for the most part, this is an extremely revered album, and for good reason. What Kendrick manages to do here from a conceptual standpoint is absolutely, absolutely excellent. The stories of his past that run so deeply into absolutely every single element of this record. These singles that made so much more sense within context all work as a testament to how conceptually tight and impressive this record is. And while I could talk about that all day, the fact of the matter is the music on this album is just excellent. Kendrick is such a talented and versatile songwriter and performer. The variety he manages to achieve on this album is absolutely amazing. The production is great, Kendrick is great, a number of his best songs ever come up on this thing. It is truly, truly a remarkable experience. It is amazing that so many people were introduced to Kendrick Lamar through this masterfully crafted world of violence and excess, but also love and genuine affection for people around him and the place where he comes from. It is a story with layers that is just as worth unfolding and diving into as the amazing music through which that story is told. I could talk all day about how great Good Kid, Mad City is, and believe me, dozens of YouTube video essay infographic accounts have already done so. So if you're really, really feeling Kendrick, check them out, because there's probably some pretty good content out there. But as far as me, I think this thing is spectacular. I think it is impressively conceptual in a way that pretty much only Kendrick himself is capable of topping. And I think it's the second best album of 2012. And if you heard that suggestion of going to watch video essays about Kendrick Lamar, I seriously do think that you should take that to heart and follow that ambition, because you're not gonna like what comes next. Macklemore, I'm kidding, please, God, I'm kidding. But in a sense, we have to talk about an artist that there are at least some people out there who would rather listen to and indulge with Macklemore than Lana Del Rey. Yes, my number one favorite album of 2012, a cultural landmark of the year, if there ever was one, Lana Del Rey's breakout debut album, Born to Die. What an inconquerable piece of pop excellence. While other artists have gone to experiment and indulge more in different directions and different styles of pop music in the decades since, purely in terms of songwriting, it is impossible for me to conjure up another album whose songwriting is as punchy, as intoxicating, as memorable, as infectious, and as rewarding as Lana on Born to Die. Even on later records where the conceptual or sonically experimental side of her music takes over, like Ultraviolence and Norman fucking Rockwell, they are not reaching the level of pure, orgasmic pop structures, hooks, verses, bridges. Everything on here plays into the overall themes, the overall compositions in a way that makes them as satisfying as anything I have ever heard. When I say this record is amazing, I think a lot of people will roll their eyes and chalk that up to its shtick. Lana Del Rey's 2012 Tumblr, Lolita, Daddy Kink, and yes, all of that is fucking amazing, and it helps make this album what it is, but it would not be enough to propel this thing to the legendary status that it has in 2022 without some amazing, amazing songs to back it up, and this thing is not short for amazing songs. The deep cuts on this record could easily go toe-to-toe with the greatest hits of a lot of Lana Del Rey's contemporaries. That's how high she set the bar. That's how far ahead of the crowd she is operating. These songs absolutely soak with this brilliant and remarkable aesthetic charm that runs so deeply into absolutely everything that Lana does, whether she is introspecting and looking into herself in the most intimate and personal ways on this record, or whether she is describing this exuberance, this massive, almost incalculable lust for life and excess. It is always through the consistent vision of Lana Del Rey. Whether you were reading these lyrics, whether you were watching the videos, or whether you were just listening to these songs, even the instrumentals, everything comes together to perfectly craft this symbolic pop vision of excess, and it is so intoxicating, so compelling, so remarkable. I could praise every single individual element of this record ad nauseum, but I feel like I would never be able to measure the impact that just listening to it, truly indulging with it, and understanding what Born to Die is, what it means, and what it has to say can do for you. And that is pretty much it. I have been listening to these albums a lot. I think that I successfully squeaked in at making this video not like an hour and a half long. Thank God. My vocals are shot, though there is so much more I want to say about so many of these records. No idea what I'll be doing next. I'll try to come up with a fun idea, something to publish before the update at the end of April, hopefully. Thank you for watching if you made it all of this way. Links in the description to everything that I am up to, and thanks. See you next time, where I might just be compelled to do a track-by-track breakdown of this album so I can try to quantify its brilliance. And just a little teaser for the top 50 songs of 2012 that's coming later this year. This is what makes us fucking girls.